And welcome back. I am Rita Cosby. Steve Bannon, longtime ally of former President Donald Trump, has now been sentenced to 4 months behind bars for defying a subpoena to testify in front of the January 6th committee. That same committee also now has officially subpoenaed former President Trump. That happened yesterday after they voted to do it last week. And for more, we are joined by former legal counsel to President Trump and also Newsmax contributor. There she is, Jenna Ellis. Great to have her there. And also distinguished university professor at Touro University, Thane Rosenbaum. So good to have both of you guys. Wonderful to have you here with us. You know, Jenna, I just want to get your reaction first to what happened with Steve Bannon. Were you surprised that they gave him 4 months? Of course, they're letting him stay out while the appeals go through. But were you surprised that they really said, okay, you know, threw the book at him with at least some jail time? And where do you think it's going to end up?
Yeah, it's such a political prosecution and a political persecution. And the fact that Steve Bannon got actual jail time from this judge that went along with basically the recommendation of the DOJ, which was 6 months, but that he actually imposed 4 months, I believe is a miscarriage of justice. And I hope that Steve Bannon does win on appeal because, you know, listen, we've had Democrats in just recent American history, like Eric Holder, who was held in contempt of Congress for failing to turn over documents during the Fast and Furious scandal. And even though he was held in contempt of Congress, he never served a day. We have a host of other Democrats who all said, no, there's a separation of powers. We are not required to go along with these types of subpoenas from various select committees from Congress, and they never served a day. And so what we're seeing here is that always that the Democrats want to play by different rules when it comes not just to Republicans, but anyone associated with Donald Trump. And that's what they're doing now, subpoenaing him and actually saying that they think he's going to comply with that subpoena. That will never happen, nor should it. It's a violation of the separation of powers. Yeah, and I definitely want to get into, there's a lot of issues there. Thane, first off, on the Bannon case,
you know, Jenna brings up a good point, because if you look at the history with Eric Holder, nothing happened after Fast and Furious. Lois Lerner, that's another case. Is there a double standard of justice?
Rita, I got a better one for you. Remember, there were 4 of Trump's associates who worked in the White House at different points who were given subpoenas to testify and produce documents. And they, too, were in contempt of Congress. That one would be Mark Meadow and Scavino. Or is it Navarro, one of them?
Scavino, Dan Scavino, yep.
Navarro is going to have his trial next month. And they failed to comply with the subpoenas, and there was no criminal indictment brought against them. So why the double standard even within some of Trump's associates, right? This is another reason why Donald Trump won't appear, because 4 of his own associates didn't comply with the subpoena. Why would he? So yes, it's beyond a double standard. The other point is, let's remember, it's been 50 years since anyone served a day in jail for contempt of Congress. It was back to the McCarthy Red Scare era with Hollywood screenwriters. Those are the last people that ever served any time for violating this rule. So clearly the message was being sent, but I will say Bannon showed a lot of contempt to the court. It wasn't just that he didn't show up and wear a tie. He was bashing them on his podcast. And I think some of that, honestly, Rita, was related to his complete disrespect for the committee and for the criminal investigation itself.
Well, and you know, it's interesting, even afterwards, by the way, he even said, you know, that he hopes that, you know, something happens to Merrick Garland and something happens afterwards. Jenna, let me get your response on President Trump. You mentioned that you think there's no way that he's going to testify. Do you believe this committee, though, is going down the same road? Because some people are saying maybe this is a harbinger, a signal of how they're going to handle President Trump. The other thing I found really interesting, Jen, I was looking at the subpoena that they issued for Trump. It's November 4th for the documents part of it, and then for the actual testimony. Interesting, it's November 14th. It's just a few days after the midterms. How do you interpret that, Jenna?
Well, they're trying to affect the outcome of the midterms clearly because the Democrats have been very persistently clear that there's nothing more that they would like to do than get Donald Trump. And that's all that this is about. That's all it's ever been about. This is just the latest in a series of different scams and hoaxes that they have perpetuated to try to ultimately get Donald Trump. And so, of course, if they could, they would try to hold him in contempt and have the same thing happen as with Steve Bannon, because there's nothing more that they would like to do for any basis, any reason. This is political persecution. And it's so interesting, Rita, that, the left cries that it's such a bad thing when Putin jails his political opponents, and yet they're screaming this is a great thing when they want to persecute and jail their political opponents. And this is something that should never happen in the United States of America. And I hope that the response to this is a reckoning day for not only the January 6th committee and Joe Biden's failed regime, but the entire Democrat perspective and their entire history over the last few years of persecuting their political opponents on November 8th and a red wave so that the January 6th committee is disbanded when Republicans take back control of the House, and this stops.
And that thing real quickly, that is what could happen clearly, because if the Republicans do take it on and they get the House and the Senate, or at least even the House, it could potentially be in January. Well, what committee, right? So is it moot? Where do you see it going real quickly, Thane?
Rita, the subpoena itself expires at the end of this congressional term, and the committee itself will dissolve if Republicans take back the House. So clearly this was an effort. Remember, this committee started its work a year ago, and it wasn't until the last day that they decided, oh, yes, we should subpoena the president, and he should be the main target of the investigation. Why wait until the end unless optics was on the mind of the committee?
Yeah, and that's even something that the president said, both of you guys, because he said, what took you so long? He was even playing with them. Both of you, thank you very, very much. And everybody coming up, Russia